They were sold as symbols of progress, gateways to prosperity, proof that the future had arrived early. Runways stretching into the horizon, terminals glowing at night, promises stacked higher than control towers. But here's the paradox most people miss. The more modern they looked, the more hollow they became. Across the world, governments poured billions into airports that nobody uses. Not because engineers failed, but because numbers lied, incentives warped, and hubris overruled reality. What was meant to be infrastructure turned into a mirage, a concrete tomb trapping capital, pride, and debt. This isn't just a story about empty terminals and silent gates. It's about how forecast fantasies become political trophies, how liquidity bleeds out quietly, and how systemic failure hides behind shiny glass. If you've ever wondered how rational plans end in economic stagnation and ghost cities, this is the pattern they never teach you to see. It always starts with a clean spreadsheet and a dirty secret, a mirage sold as math. Consultants project entropy away, pretending structural fatigue, corrosion, and decay won't show up. They're paid to say yes to greenlight a vanity project that looks rational but is hollow inside. That's how a concrete tomb gets approved, a calculated risk masking hubris in a red ledger. Then comes the linear trap, where GDP up means flights up, no questions asked. Market saturation is dormant in these models, like a ghost city nobody wants to name. It's mathematical ruin dressed as prudence, a house of cards, ignoring asset liability. If this pattern feels familiar, that's why subscribing matters. Most people never see it coming. Future tourism becomes the favorite fairy tale, a Potemkin village with glossy brochures. Ciudad Real, Zhengzhou, sold as seismic shift moments, but they became industrial wastelands. No attractions, no demand, just capital flight and economic stagnation locked in concrete. A money pit born from negligence, bleeding. Liquidity until the hemorrhage can't be hidden. If you build it, they will come. Sounds poetic, but infrastructure doesn't create souls. Airlines follow passengers, not runways, or else you get uninhabitable terminals and insolvency. That's the sunk cost fallacy whispering through a logistical nightmare of empty gates. And once politics smells opportunity, this forecast fantasy mutates into something louder. Airports become trophies because they photograph well, concrete proof of action. Short-term mandate rewards cranes, not cash flow, spectacle over sustainability. Jobs appear fast, headlines faster, while structural fatigue is politely ignored. By the time entropy shows up, the politician's already gone, applause still echoing. What never makes the campaign poster is the maintenance debt quietly piling up. Security, HVAC, runway resurfacing, fixed costs that don't care about passenger counts. They get pushed forward like sovereign debt, a red ledger for future administrations. That's how a white elephant survives politically while bleeding liquidity in silence. Then comes regional jealousy, the quiet driver nobody admits out loud. One city builds, the neighbor panics, and suddenly demand is assumed, not proven. Its competitive signaling turned into a vanity project, a Potemkin village of parity. If you track these patterns closely, subscribing helps. You start seeing the setup early. Behind it all sits the contractor lobby, calm, patient, and very well funded. Construction firms profit up front, immune to insolvency once the ribbon is cut. The airport can become a ghost city, an uninhabitable money pit, still they're paid. And as this house of cards grows, the real danger shifts from politics to finance. Before this story goes further, here's the hard truth. If you want to understand how infrastructure hubris, capital flight, and systemic failure actually unfold before they hit the headlines, this channel is where that pattern gets decoded. Subscribe. Turn on all notifications and keep following these deep analyses. Because reacting late is how governments, investors, and cities get trapped in mathematical ruin. An airport doesn't need planes to start losing money. It only needs to open its doors. From day one, fixed costs kick in like gravity. Staff, power, security, systems humming in empty halls. Revenue is supposed to follow, but instead liquidity starts to leak, slow at first, then like a hemorrhage. That's how a functional terminal quietly turns into a money pit, hollow but expensive to keep alive. To avoid admitting failure, governments begin paying airlines to land where nobody wants to go. Subsidies become lifelines framed as incentives, but really just capital flight in slow motion. The dependency loop hardens, a calculated risk that morphs into negligence as insolvency looms. If you're tracking this kind of pattern, subscribing helps. You learn to spot the spiral early. What's rarely discussed is how empty infrastructure decays faster than busy one ever could. HVAC systems fail from inactivity, corrosion spreads, escalators freeze, entropy accelerates. Asset liability compounds as depreciation outruns any hope of recovery, a silent mathematical ruin. The airport becomes uninhabitable in practice long before it's abandoned on paper. Closing it should be logical, but logic has no seat in political survival. The sunk cost fallacy takes over, turning shutdown into career suicide. Bailouts follow. Bailouts, a red ledger growing thicker as economic stagnation settles in. And just ahead, scattered across the globe, stand the monuments to this exact failure. Pause for a moment. These liquidity spirals don't just explain failed airports, they explain failing cities, funds, even nations. If you want to keep learning how systemic failure actually forms, subscribe to the channel, activate all notifications, and stay with these deep dives. Understanding this early is how you avoid living inside. The next concrete tomb. Ciudad Real was supposed to be Spain's aviation's seismic shift, a private gateway to endless tourism. Designed for 10 million passengers a year, it barely saw a fraction of that in its entire lifetime. The terminal sat hollow, a concrete tomb surrounded by scrubland, decay setting in fast. When it sold at auction for barely 10% of its cost, the Mirage finally collapsed. Zhengzhou tells a different story, but ends in the same place, built as an airport city for Foxconn workers. The forecast assumed people fly just because runways exist. Instead, terminals stayed dormant, a Potemkin village masking capital flight and asset liability. The pivot to logistics kept it alive on paper, but the passenger dream became a ghost city. Then there's Matala Rajapaksa Airport, often called the world's emptiest, with uncomfortable accuracy. Built with foreign sovereign debt, it became shorthand for debt-trapped narratives and architectural arrogance. Flights came and went, wildlife moved in, and liquidity vanished into a red ledger of bailouts. It wasn't bad engineering. It was hubris wrapped in a vanity project no one needed. Berlin-Brandenburg never fully died, but it aged in public. 14 years of delays, corrosion behind walls, and costs spiraling into mathematical ruin. A logistical nightmare where systemic failure cascaded from wiring to governance. Different outcome, same lesson. Infrastructure can survive and still hemorrhage credibility. This is the point where patterns stop being coincidences. These airports aren't anomalies, they're case studies in how House of Cards economics scale globally. If you want to keep seeing through Potemkin villages before they're built, subscribe, turn on all notifications, and stay close, because once the concrete sets, the cascading failure is already underway. If you zoom out, these airports stop being curiosities and start looking uncomfortably familiar. They're the same pattern behind failed investments, bloated companies, and policies that collapse under their own weight. A vanity project justified by forecasts, protected by politics, and sustained by the sunk cost fallacy until liquidity is gone. The real lesson isn't about aviation or infrastructure. It's about learning to question growth narratives, to spot mirages before you buy into them. About recognizing when something is being built to look successful, not to function sustainably. So here's the uncomfortable question. Where? In your own decisions, are you mistaking scale for value, construction for progress, motion for demand? What projects, careers, or investments look impressive but are quietly becoming your own concrete tomb? If this analysis shifted how you see the world, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, activate all notifications, and keep following these deep dives. Because understanding systemic failure early is the difference between adapting in time and living inside the collapse.